I want to extend my gratitude and thanks to the Tasmanian Royal Society for the invite to come along here today to talk about the City of Launceston and how we manage our valuable materials, whether those materials are ones that we are recovering or whether those are some of those materials that we're managing as far as the landfill. Today I will start, or the presentation will take a few steps, I suppose. I'd like to start with a little bit of a status of Tasmania's waste management or resource recovery. Have a look about how that compares to our national story. Have a look about how that compares indeed to the global story. After that, I'd like to delve in and talk about the regional landfill facility that the City of Launceston own and manage here in northern Tasmania. And then I'd like to touch on some of the curbside services that we offer, like the landfilling, like recycling, and also like our food organics and garden organics, or the new green bin system that you guys might have come across in your councils or indeed this council. After that, I want to touch on some of the data. So we do a lot of auditing data of our waste streams, and what that does, it gives us a really great idea as far as how do we prioritise our investment and our projects for the future so that we can do better in this space. After that, then I will launch into the carbon story. So the carbon story is quite significant from landfilling, and when I give presentations around this, people are quite surprised about the amount of carbon emissions that we're actually generating from landfills, locally, nationally and globally as well. And then we'll finalise the presentation. We'll have a chat about some of the opportunities and indeed some of the challenges. But I will say right now in this sector, it's unprecedented movement as far as policy and legislation that we have not seen before, not at this scale. So it's quite exciting. That's setting up, I guess, the framework now for us to do a lot better in this situation. Not only is there the policy of the framework, but there's also the investment, unprecedented levels coming from the national government and also from our state government here. So while this sector does attract a lot of criticism, I think there's also a very bright future for us all. And we're all contributors, aren't we? We're all part of the community. We're all waste generators. We are all resource recovery specialists as well in our own way. So we'll get started. Now, when I was asked to do this presentation, of course I had a look at the Royal Society of Tasmania's list, so the presentations that have been and the presentations that are coming. And I did notice that there were a lot of doctors presenting. Okay, so that kind of raised my anxiety levels a little bit and also intimidated me somewhat. But then I did remember that there was one point in time when I was a doctor, and it was only for one edition of the Examiner newspaper. but that was enough for me. And that's when I was working with Innerroom North, and we were part of the Tamar Estuary program. We were doing a monitoring program up at Lake Geraldine looking for blue-green algae. There was a number of reasons for that, because of the drinking water quality, but also the recreational aspects. So one day I was hanging over the side of a boat taking samples, and I saw a jellyfish about the size of a 10-cent piece come past. And I was thinking, I'm not in the ocean, I'm in a freshwater lake. And sure enough, it was a freshwater jellyfish, this one here, Craspedacusta salvi. But anyway, we took the sample, and it's actually in the records here. So it was the first time that it was recorded in Tasmania. And it was due mainly because of the hot weather that we were going through. This was around 2009. And they actually come from China. So they're on the feet of migratory birds. And that's how they end up here. They're fairly uncommon. You don't see a lot of them. But, you know, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about this time and how the Examiner did get it wrong. But then all my colleagues at Innerroom North for the next 8 years called me Dr. Attard. So I was pretty happy about that. But it also got me thinking about, you know, in water quality, in aquatic ecology, in water chemistry, we talk about micrograms, we talk about milligrams, we talk about chemistry. And it's really hard back then to get people to to acknowledge that or to grasp that concept. You know, so now I've moved on in my measurements and units. Okay, so now I'm talking about tons. Now I'm talking about like kilotons, megatons. I'm talking about kilograms, cubic meters. You know, so and there's a lot more tangible in that regard. So forgive my digressing this early in the piece, but I just wanted to set the scene for that. And now we'll get into what we're talking about as far as what we see here in Tasmania and everywhere else. Okay, so the global perspective. When we look at the waste that is generated around our world, give or take around 500 million people, 2.1 billion tonnes is generated in landfill each year. Now, how does that compare to our national perspective in Australia? 7.8 million tonnes that is being landfilled each year. All right, little Tassie, the place that we know and love. 500,000 people, around 500,000 tonnes per year is being put into the ground in our state. Now, I guess when we think about that, we think about what are our contributions to that. What are yours? What are mine? And when we think about that in the Tasmanian perspective, we're looking at around just under a tonne per person, per capita, per year. That's what we're generating, which is extraordinary when we think about it. And I'm sure that a lot of you are doing much better in this space, but this is something that we share across the state, across Australia nationally and across the globe as well. When we look at that near 1 tonne, 920 kilos, 540 kilos of that is what's generated in our curbside landfill bins, and that's what goes to landfill locally. This is important as far as trying to set the scene on when we talk about resource recovery and waste management. We've got waste categories, streams that come in, so that we can try and understand how it goes over time. I've never used this pointer before. Ooh. It's quite broad, isn't it? Anyway, just follow the cursor. Okay, so when we're talking about these waste categories, MSW, okay, I'll just explain what a few of these things are. That's municipal solid waste. So that is that component that is going into your weekly or fortnightly bins, okay, that goes to landfill. C&D, construction and demolition, is another major waste source type. Then we have C&I, which is commercial and industrial, and then up the top there, commercial and industrial just for power generation. And here are the materials that make that up. I might get rid of this thing because this, yeah, right. I think you can kind of have a look anyway. But I guess what this is showing us is these are our streams and these are the materials that make that stream up. And when we look at some of these materials like organics, when we look at paper, when we look at metals, these are all recoverable materials. These are all valuable materials that we can have still circulating in and around our economies and our communities. But that gives you an idea of what we're producing and the composition of that. Everything that we're doing as far as waste professionals or people that are trying to divert material away from landfills is looked at through this waste hierarchy. Okay, it's essentially a triage system where we say, okay, what are we going to do? Now, the avoidance part is the primary part. Okay, if we can avoid using these materials, these single-use plastics, then we're ahead of the game. But what's really interesting, I think, is when we look at the recycle part, it's so low down the hierarchy. You know, reduce, that makes sense. Reuse, that makes sense. You know, the shoes that I'm wearing at the moment, I've resold 3 times. I think I'm at the end. I don't think I'm going to get another sole out with the way they feel, but you know, that's an example of doing that. Repair is the next part. Recycle, recover, dispose. Of course, the landfill's right at the bottom. So that's the lens at which we look at things as far as how we're going to try and manage these materials. Okay, how waste works in the north of Tasmania is that we have City of Launceston has the regional landfill, And pretty much, and there's another landfill at Deloraine, which is a patriciable landfill that has that organic component. But everywhere else we have waste transfer stations, and essentially, and you guys would have seen this, they're just like big bins where you go and put that waste, and then it's trucked to wherever it's going. In this case, it's coming out to the City of Launceston, which is the second largest landfill in Tasmania. The first, or the largest one's one Copping down south. We have Port Ladder up in the north. We also have Goulburn up near Spraydon. They're the major landfills that we have here in Tasmania. But that gives you an idea of how it works. But it also introduces this complexity of distance and the ability to intercept that material, because once it's in a waste transfer station and it comes to the landfill, there's no way to intercept that. And it ends up in a place like this. This is the City of Launceston landfill. I'm sure enough of us do remember going to the landfill with our parents, or going ourselves, you know. You can no longer do that because of safety reasons, but I think we all remember the smells and the excitement and the fact that we would probably take some stuff with us, but we'd also take some stuff back. You know, a bit of scavenging off the face, as it were. But this is what it looks like now at the City of Launceston. This is the actual footprint of our facility. Now, this facility opened in 1983, and this is up at Remount Road or Calvary Road. And the City of Launceston own a lot of land up there as a buffer around this actual landfill. Like I said, it opened in 83. Prior to that, Heritage Park was the landfill, and people might remember that as well. So now that's soccer grounds, now that's recreational areas, dog parks. And if we keep going back in history, even the city park was a landfill at one point that not many people know about. So it is quite an extensive, large area. And what I want to just, I guess, let you know is that we are regulated by the EPA under an environmental protection notice. So, you know, we are audited every single year. There's nothing that we can do on this site that we need to have prior permission from the EPA and also Natural Resources Environment Division. So it's well regulated, and it is actually a good relationship that we have. I'll try this thing again now. Okay, here we go. Right, so this is the waste centre. So hands up who has used the Launceston Waste Centre, please. Okay, so probably most of us, we might have some outlying other councils. So that's where the pointer is now. That's the recycling shed. Over here is the walking floor where we recover materials before it goes to landfill. Over here is the waste transfer station. Here's the resale shop, and here is the gate house. So this is where we have a weighbridge of things coming in and then going out. As we head up the road, this way, is the green waste area. We head up the road and we're getting to the actual landfills. These are new landfills here. This one up the very north of the picture here, when I started 7 years ago, that was only just being constructed. That filled up in 5 years. The one below here, we're estimating that that'll fill up in about 4 years. If we travel a little bit more around, this area over here is a current landfill that has been filled and has been capped. And down here is our organics processing facility where we take care of the food organics and garden organics that comes in and we turn that into compost. So it's a very large area. And these cells are highly engineered. When we talk about the impacts of landfilling, the major ones are our carbon emissions. Okay, so methane going up and being a harmful greenhouse gas is probably the primary impact. Then we also have leachate. So all that material that is just decomposing turns into liquid, which is very contaminated, that we have to be able to capture and treat. So these cells are highly engineered in the fact that no water, surface water or groundwater can get off that site. And we do monitoring around that to make sure that that never happens. Very expensive business. Yeah, these cells, that cell that you can see there with the crush rock, the grey area, that cost $11 million to that point. Then we've got to fill it, and then we've got to cap it so that nothing escapes. And that's probably another $3 to $5 million when we do that. So it's very, very expensive business. I just wanted to highlight that part out. Now, as far as quantities, what we're taking in each year into the Launceston landfill is ranging between that, you know, more between 90,000 and 80,000 tonnes per year. Okay, it does fluctuate a little bit, but you can see that the trend line is going up. So waste nationally and even globally, more nationally as far as the statistics go, 4% increase each year. So everything that we're doing as far as resource recovery, recycling, we're doing our best to stem that tide, but we're also up against it because waste generation is still increasing. So this information here that you can see is just talking about those waste categories that I talked about before: construction, demolition, commercial, industrial, and this one's got our own council. So this is an audit that was done of our waste transfer station and our landfills. Okay, so this is us, the self-haul people. So this is down the bottom. I'm sorry if you can't see that. Yep, just got to wrangle this thing a bit. So this is us. So this is the families, the mum and dads, the domestic component that goes out to landfills. Now it's interesting to know when we look at C&D and C&I, when we're presenting, we're only 10% the domestic loads. When we take our trailers or whatever we're doing, 10%. 90% is commercial, whether that's construction, demolition or the C&I component. And on the your right-hand side is what the council staff are actually taking in. So I'm going to be throwing up some statistics now. I talked about these audits that happen. When we do audits, it's around every 4 years so that we can measure change over time. This was done in 2021. And this is where we went and looked at our landfill and also our waste transfer stations to understand what fraction of the material that's going in there can be recovered. You can see here, when we look at that, 45% recoverable at least. And that's probably a bit conservative. When we look at some of the categories that can be recovered, when we look down, we've got some plastic films can be recovered. Cardboard, food organics, garden organics, metals. These are things that we just aren't getting to before they actually end up in the landfill. So that's something that we need to think about. How are we going to address that? Here's just some images of what we see on a day-to-day basis up at the landfill. Okay, what have we got here? A lot of cardboard, a lot of fibre. Cardboard can be turned back into fibre products so easily. Polystyrene, standard polystyrene, expanded polystyrene is recyclable. The clear plastics is recyclable. You know, this is what we see on a daily basis. And this is only because we have no facility to intercept at the moment. Another example, look, there's a lot of metal in there. Again, so much cardboard and plastic. But it's really highlighting that there's valuable materials there that we're not being able to access. This is an interesting story. This is another audit. So what we did is we looked at, this was through the Northern Tasmania Waste Management Group, we looked at the waste generated and then the proportion that could be recovered from a standard house build. So as soon as we broke ground, we had people there collecting the material, and then we worked out what fraction of that would be recoverable. And you can see there in the middle, 62% is recoverable off that site. So this is when we're talking about construction and demolition materials. Again, an area for us to focus on now. I just wanted to highlight with the Launceston landfill, the regional landfill that we own and operate, we have a plan for it. There's a lot of planning that goes into this, and more currently last year, we worked out, based on the volumes and the land that we have, how long we're going to go out to. And at the moment, based on those two factors, 2050 is the time that we're going to go to, based on the current volumes. That said, though, hopefully we're going to introduce a lot of new projects, and new innovations will come along that will be able to extend the life of that landfill. When we look at other places, indeed in Europe, there's landfill bans now. There's no landfilling that's occurring because they are recovering so much material before it gets there. But the motivation's a little bit different to us too, though, because Australia is so resource rich and our virgin materials are so inexpensive. There's not a lot of motivation and momentum to be able to recover these valuable materials. Whereas in Europe, in particular in some countries, you know, they aren't resource rich. They need to make these materials last as long as they possibly can. Okay, I want to dive through what is in our curbside bins that go to landfill. Okay, another audit done. Basically, we looked at, I think it was over 5,000 cubic metres of material that was coming in regionally from Tasmania because we're the regional landfill. And this is the information that came out of it. But before we get there, when we're looking at this fraction here in our red littered bins, what do you think is the fraction that we might be able to recover out of that? Anyone got a quick one, or I'll run through it?
At least 50%.
Oh,
80.
80?
I'd go 80.
I like that. I like 80.
It should be 100.
It should be 100. It should. But 80 is really great, and I say why, because they are the targets that are coming out nationally and the targets that are coming from our state government as well. But who said 50%? Someone said 50% up there. That's pretty close. It's a pretty close. Okay, so we'll run through it. It's not 5%. It's not 10. It's not 20. It's not 40. It's not even 50. When we did our study and our audit, 67% of what is in our red bins can be recovered. Okay. I must also say, when we did this audit, we didn't include households that already had food organics or garden organics, the green bins. Okay, so we didn't do that because we wanted to know what was in these fractions. And this is how it's broken down. So when we look in these bins, we're seeing the food organics component, 33%. Absolutely massive opportunity. Again, with the garden organics, same thing. Other organics might be wood products, things like that. Paper and cardboard, and then you commingle recycle. But you can see there's only 33% of the residual component that would actually go to landfill. In other parts of the world, that residual component goes into waste to energy, where they actually burn it to create energy. Which has a little bit of a social licence thing going on here in Australia. But, you know, when you look at some massive ships that are out there on the ocean, they have internal ways that they combust their waste to make energy. So, you know, these can be solutions for smaller and more remote communities as well, quite easily adopted, I think. This is what I found interesting when we did this audit, that it was consistent across each and every council. Yeah, there's some minor discrepancies, but you're still looking at, you know, being able to recover well and truly in that 60%. Yeah, so it doesn't really matter what each council's doing, that organic component, the green bar, and then the recycling component at the top, it's all there to be diverted if we can work out ways of doing it. And FOGO with the green bins is a classic way of doing that. Okay, I'll talk about recycling next, okay? So, recycling, our curbside recycling. It's a very ambiguous space. We hear that all the time. What can I put in there? What can't I put in there? What I'll also talk about here is that City of Launceston, just the City of Launceston, takes in 6,000 tonnes per year of the recycled product that goes to a material recovery facility, or a MRF they call it. And what they do is basically they sort the material and they aggregate the material for it to go off in a commodity market. You know, so that's what they do. But I don't know if you're surprised about it, but I hear it just about every month. People come up to me and say, what's the point of recycling? It goes to landfill. And that there is this community perception out there that this occurs, which is very disappointing when we spend so much money on it. Particularly talking about the money. In our waste charges, within our rates, it's the recycling that's driving up the price. When I first started 7 years ago, to recycle 1 tonne or sort 1 tonne of the curbside recycling material was around $80 per tonne. Okay? Today, it is $300 per tonne, which is double that of landfill. So the landfill price that we have here is around $157 per tonne at the gate fee. So you can see the issues that we're having because we're trying to encourage people to do recycling, but it's twice the price. So when we look at some of our more, some of our commercial entities and things like that, they're like, well, I'm not going to do So this is where the landfill levies and everything have a place to play. This is what a typical recovery facility looks like. This is a very state-of-the-art one, of which we have one being made now in Sprayton. So Veolia is the waste contractor who won the award with City of Launceston. That's where we'll be taking that in the future. There is one here which is pretty old and limping. And the beauty of having new ones is that it's not just going to be a collection, sorting and aggregation, it's going to be next step processing. So I'll actually cut some things up, wash it and sell it as a premium product rather than it being mixed and contaminated. But this is what it looks like in our recycling bins. And you can see the component there that the majority of it is fibre based, so that's your cardboard and your paper, and it's always been that way. Then you've got your glass component, which is obviously quite heavy because this is by weight. The plastics to a small degree, metals, and then the contamination rate in Launceston's about 10%, you know, and sometimes, and that's pretty good nationally as well. But people will say, oh, geez, that's not very good. Well, I would argue that 90% recovery is pretty good. That people do tend to stay on the 10% part of it. Of course, we can do better at that, and there's no doubt that we can. But this is where all this data is so important for our understanding. And this gives you an idea of the types of things that is making up that 10% component as far as the contamination goes. And by far what we see as the largest is bagged domestic product, or indeed bagged recycling. So people feel like they're doing the right thing and keeping things nice and clean by putting their recycling in their soft plastic bag, tying it off and putting it in. Once it gets into the bin there and once it gets to the facilities, there is no way of opening that up. So they just see that as contamination straight away, and it gets taken off the line and is discarded and goes to landfill. So that's one of the messages that we're trying to get through. There's all sorts of things. There's nappies, textiles, polystyrene, but this gives us an idea of where we can focus some of our education. Okay, let's talk about FOGO, food organics and garden organics. Does anyone have this service? Yeah. Okay, quite a few. That's really great. And I suppose a lot of people that have their own composting don't worry about it anyway. And what we find really is those large, even semi-rural, larger properties that can deal with it themselves, people that have chickens, people that have dogs. Like, we've done a survey on this to try and understand this, and that's what's come back to us. But from an urban setting, it's really a great way of being able to convert these organic materials, which are otherwise going to turn into methane without landfills. When we look at this character here on your left, that's me in the hamburger. And, you know, we talk about career development and things like that, and, you know, working and studying in the sciences and in research. Well, my director said, I'll talk to your comms people and we'll get you to wear a hamburger suit so that we can promote food organics and things like that. And I was very dubious about this at the time. I wasn't very happy about this. Like, I'm a professional. Anyway, I did it, and we did get some cut through, but what happened was they made a character out of me, which I think is a little bit unkind in proportions. But I must admit that having the characters has helped us get where we need to get with some of the education around this. Often they'll make me wear it. They used to, I refuse now, but I have the hamburger suit, and they'd even make me wear it at like barbecues and stuff at the City of Launceston. It's in a box. Let's talk about FOGO. So when we looked at the audit of what's in the landfill, FOGO is a massive component. The organic component is very large indeed, so it gives us a great opportunity to get it out. All right, the City of Launceston started a food organics and garden organics collection in 2017. We were the first council in Tasmania to do it. It was a project that I was heavily involved in, and members of my team were heavily involved in and we're extremely proud of, because it's a win-win-win situation. We get to get the organics away from landfill. Number one, that's great because we're reducing our costs, we're reducing our impact on the environment. For every 4 years that we run an organics facility, we're saving 1 year life on that landfill. The other great part of it is we've got these valuable nutrients that we're able to create through the compost and keep them circulating within our landscapes and environments as well. So it's really a win-win-win situation. And I'm so glad that it's been accepted so broadly here in Launceston, but now all the other councils that are taking it on as well. And I do admit it's a bit harder in the rural councils to establish this with the space and the travel time and the infrastructure. But I think certainly in high density type population or mid density population areas, this is the way forward. Last year we processed 11,000 tonnes, and what that looks like, and you just got to roughly double it. Don't hold me to the calculations. But that equates to around 22,000 tonnes of methane being produced. So that's what we're abating. Currently the price is $87 per tonne, which is over that 40% cheaper than actually going to landfill. So what we're seeing is that people, and particularly organisations, are seeing that as a saving as well. So they don't have to go to landfill, which is fantastic. We've got a very low contamination rate, only 0.5%. Currently we have 14,000 registrations only in Launceston, okay? When Launceston launched this, the councillors wanted this to be well accepted, and what they did was say, let's go under a voluntary nature. So let's see if people want to do it and make that incentivised by doing a one-off cost $65. It's been that way since then. I can't guarantee that that will stay like that in the future because things will be changing, but it just shows you how well it was adapted during that time. And indeed the carbon abatements that are associated with that. You would have seen the caddies that you have in your kitchen. I'm a family of 4, 2 young kids. We're in my caddy there because I've been weighing it for the last 2 years. I'm averaging about 15 kilos a week in my caddy, so that's nearly 30 kilos every fortnight that's collected, let alone my garden waste. This is just the food waste component. This is a little bit of how the process works, I guess, is that we have the collection out in our urban areas. It comes in to our site where we decontaminate any material in there. Then we run through the composting process, which I'll step through more in pictures. But I guess it's important here also to talk about what component is in these bins. We're seeing less than 10% food in the FOGO bins. Yeah, 90% of it's garden waste. So it's saving people going to the landfill, I understand that, and it's quite convenient, but we're really missing the food component, which is the nitrogen load. So the carbon load being for the gardens, or the leafy matter and things like that, but the nitrogen load as the food is the important part. We were able to broker a really good partnership with the Launceston General Hospital. So early in the piece I thought, well, where is a large output as far as a commercial kitchen, but also returns on the food that they produce. And we went out there and we found that they were producing 2 tonne a week. That's from their food production and also the returns. So we talked to our waste contractor and we worked out a way of getting their material into FOGO. So it's 2 tonne a week that we're being able to divert that was otherwise going to landfill. It's been a really great example of what can happen. We also have a couple of hotels on as well. Silos Hotels is one of them. So another area where we need to expand. But when the material comes in, we use what's called a mobile aerated floor, or a MAF for short. Essentially all that is a big air compressor. It has a manifold on it. It has these pipes that go into the, I'll show you this, here it is, that's what it looks like. And all we're trying to do with these units, and this is fairly low-tech composting, is push air up through the rows that we have on it. Why do we want to do that? We want to do that to increase the temperature. We want to have it more uniformly going through that. And also it helps to produce, reduce odour, which is an issue on a landfill, believe it or not. So the guys set it up, then we get that material in and on. And once it's fully loaded, and it's all done with machinery, we add water, which is a really important part of the composting process. It essentially allows those microbacteria to be able to move around, to be mobile within the pipe. And this is what it looks like from an aerial point of view. Comes in, goes on our mobile aerated floors. Now when it hits those floors, it's a 12-week period from when it comes in to when it's actually finished composting. So when people were there giving us training, they said I was trying to understand how did the bones and everything disappear. And they said, well, get a slow cooker, put it on 80 degrees, put a chicken in it and leave it for 3 months. And I was like, okay. And more recently we've been doing a trial with, there's a local company here called Leaner Game Meats, and they have a lot of byproduct, whether that's wallaby or deer. So we thought, well, let's take something. We talked to our operators, we talked to the people out there, said, look, we're going to have this load come in. And what we did, we wrapped it in, and when it came in, we kind of crumbed it in sawdust, and then we added green waste to it and we put it on the pile. And guess what? Within 1 month, there's nothing left. It's already gone. Wallaby legs and everything. So, seemingly the hardest thing to get out is a pig's jaw. That would be the longest thing to decompose or to move in composting. Interesting little piece of information. But everything we do, we're regulated. We have to come to standard, okay? So this is the AS4454, the Australian Standard for Compost Soil Conditioners and Mulches. Each time we finish our composting, it needs to go off to a lab to be certified to come to this standard. Yeah? So we have to achieve pasteurisation, 55 degrees for at least 3 days. So we're always taking temperature, we're always taking oxygen and all that data, and indeed the samples need to go back to that lab to be accredited so that we can use it out in our environments. You can see there, what's that? That's about 70 degrees, but often we're running at 80 degrees Celsius in these compost piles. So when we talk about organics from the national level and also from the state level, we have targets. We're going to decrease our organic fraction, or divert that away from landfill, 25% of it by 25, 50% of it by 2030. They're targets, that's what we're aiming towards. And I think we're well on our way. I think we're going to do well. All right, well I think this leads well into the carbon story that we're going to talk about now with the City of Launceston, particularly the organics fraction. Why is it important that we're trying to limit our carbon dioxide or our emissions or our footprint? It's the harmful effects that we're having on our atmosphere. It's the increasing temperatures, it's the increasing variation in our weather patterns. We're all quite aware of it. And this is something that the Council accepts. I just wanted to make that clear. This is something that the Council accepts through its Climate Emergency Declaration. Now, see that little mouse there? What that little mouse represents is the City of Launceston's carbon emissions that are due to its fuel, its fleet, ongoing with cars and major plant, its heating, everything else that's related to City of Launceston emissions, but not the landfill. Here's the landfill. Like I mentioned before, once you find out, it's like, whoa. So landfills contribute to around 10% of global methane production. Cows, obviously a lot more, transport, obviously a lot more, industry, a lot too, but 10%, that is still quite significant. And this is a story that I don't think a lot of people know of. So it's about trying to get this out, and hopefully this can drive some of the changes that we need in behaviour. Okay, so as I talked about, electricity, fleet, even natural gas, which we've had some wins on, and our fuel, and then there you go, 80,000 tonnes or thereabouts of CO2, which is emitted each year from the City of Launceston landfill. And it's the same story for all the other landfills we have. Like we had the waste hierarchy, we also have a hierarchy for how we go about talking about our carbon story. The first one is to understand. So that's what we've done. We've gone out there, and now we started in 2018, but now we do it ourselves. We can do our own carbon calculations, which is fantastic. Avoid and reduce, of course. Maximise efficiencies. That's one place that we can play a big part. Transition to renewables, and then at the very bottom there is offsets. So that is, purchasing carbon offsets, whether they're international or whether they're Australian. When we're looking at as far as the scope ones, that middle pillar that you can see, composting, equipment, landfilling, industrial and fleet or transport costs, they're the ones that we're talking about as the major emitters. But you have scope 1s and 2s as well. Scope 2s and 3s, which are more indirect type emissions. So we wanted to set a baseline. This is 2018. What we saw was that 59,000 tonnes was produced by the City of Launceston, and near 90% was the landfill. If we excluded the landfill, we only had a very small amount, that 6,000 tonne. This is an interesting story, I feel. We can see what our baseline is, but have a look at our community emissions. They're so much larger, but that is taking in the industry component and the transport component and the commercial energy as well. So we've all got a part to play, obviously. And here is, just wanted to show you how we followed that after 2018. So 2018-19, oops, go back. Do this thing again. It's not direct, it takes a little bit. Okay, so there's our baseline. Here is the next year, 2019-20. Whoa, there's a pretty big jump here for 2020-21. So what happened was we had the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. They raised the global warming potential of methane by 12%. Yeah, so through their research, through their understandings, and the impacts of climate change, they raised it by 12%, which is a fair thing to do, but that explains some of these jumps. But isn't this great? The next year, even though it's small, in 21-22, we've had a reduction. Now this, while it might not seem very significant at this point, is great because this is going to be a trajectory for the City of Launceston, particularly when I explain some of the ways that we're going to be able to bring this down. What does it look like, that near around 79, let's just call it 80,000 tonnes for the sake of it, of CO2 equivalents? Driving around the world 3,750 times. Electricity for 52,000 houses per year, or 4 million trees. So that's the tangible element about what we are emitting. Now, you may be aware that Tasmania is in the enviable position nationally and globally for having actually negative net carbon. There's a number of reasons for this. Predominantly it's the amount of forests that we have, but it's also our clean energy through the hydro energy as well. So, you know, we are the apple of the eye for many other places in the world. And this positions us quite uniquely to be able to look at being innovative with the new, you know, with helping support hydrogen through green energy as well. So this is a very unique position to be in. I just want to highlight some of the things that the City of Launceston has done along the way, because what we're really good at is identifying problems and putting things in place. But what we're not good at is letting our community know what we're doing. And so we get this all the time. And, you know, we're just heads down, working really hard as teams and as networks to find solutions or to get better services for our community. But we're not great at letting the community know what we're doing so that they can come with us along the way. 2007, we had the first landfill gas capture in Australia. So that was the methane that's being produced. We're actually harnessing that to create energy, and that's very significant. I won't go through them all, but you know, we changed all our lights over to LEDs, every single street light. We've got the introduction of photo. There's a lot that's been happening along the way. Now, when we understand how much we're producing, 80,000 tonnes of CO2, straight away people within the organisation were like, well, what's that going to cost if we have to offset that amount? That's going to cost a lot of money. Yeah. So when we talk about carbon markets, when we talk about Australian carbon credit units, in Australia, particularly very much in Australia, the market is very young. It is not mature when we think about like European Union and things like that. So what we had to do is we had to at least investigate what does it look like as far as purchasing offsets. So we went and did that, and the figure came back astronomical. But these are the type of projects that you would invest in to get your carbon credits, so to speak. Carbon capture, storage, energy efficiency, all the way down to fire management and vegetation. Down the bottom there, the current spot price is around $60 per tonne, and that's the Australian carbon credit. And if you look at the EU, it's a lot higher, 85. Well, it doesn't include. When I did this, the UK was still in there, but anyway. Somewhere near $137 Australian per tonne. But soon it was raised within the organisation. What is it? You go and purchase these offsets, and they go international, or they go, within the Australian national market. What's associated with it was a huge cost. We're talking $2 to $3 million straight up. Yeah, so for council to find $2 or $3 million is not easy, or even sustainable for that matter. But then there's these other things that come up. What about the validity of it? What about the additionality which comes in the newness of it? This is how a carbon market is very complicated. It took us a long time to get our heads around it. But also, how do you measure it really, especially if it's overseas? And what we found also was that if we were going to do that, what about how do we grow our capacity locally there, if we were to do that? So basically the decision was made to look at how we can invest in our own projects to pull our carbon emissions down. And it is doable. Increase our landfill gas capture. This is a project that's just occurred, and I'll expand on that in a very second. Increase our organics. It's a no-brainer. That's what we'll do. Construction and demolition. And if you might remember, when we look back to those components of the waste stream that we're seeing at our landfills and our waste transfer station, huge component of construction and demolition and commercial and industrial. We have no way of intercepting that. We need to build a facility to intercept that. Okay, so instead of it going up to the landfill, say, hey, bring it over here, drop it on the ground, we'll have machinery and personnel and bins to get those commodities out. Those valuable materials, they'll either go to a market, but the best thing will be that we're keeping them out of landfill. Electric vehicles, reducing our gas boilers here at QVMag and other places. Transition car villa cremator off gas. Yeah, there's other options out there for cremation. One which we are looking at the moment uses hydrogen, less impacts from that. There's even liquidification, which is something that people are talking about as well. Doesn't feel good, does it? No, I'm not for liquidification. I think if I'm choosing to be burnt, I want to be burnt. I can only imagine how salty that liquid would be and what you would do with it afterwards. We can increase our solar panel systems. We do have a lot of solar that's been invested in through Launceston. Our energy of buildings and increased tree plantings, of course, because that's the staple. I want to get into the gas capture now at the City of Launceston. This is the best graph that I've ever produced. It's won awards everywhere around the world, and it's been a constant source of criticism when I do present this. But it tells the story, right? It still tells the story. Like I said, we have landfill gas capture. So as the methane is produced through the organic material decomposing, we're actually capturing a fraction of that, which then comes through to a massive cat engine, essentially using that methane as fuel to run a generator, which is the alternator on the front of that. Now that in Launceston produces enough energy for around 1,500 or 2,000 homes. Here's the stats on that. So 2007, the first one. You may have seen it there as you approach the gatehouse. It's out there on your right. 2,500 local homes powered, and abates essentially what we're emitting as well. So if we didn't have it, we would be double our emissions. So it's really good that we do have it, and it gives us great opportunity to do better with it. This is how it works. So this is the landfill, and this is all the material riding in it, and they basically have a whole network of pipes under vacuum which pull that methane out and take it to the generator, and that's where they make the power. But the other part, and the complicated part of this story, is that, I mean, you can use it for other things as well, but is that we are under a contract with the people that do it. So landfill management systems. Now, this contract is about 40 years in duration. Now, I don't even know if that's legal anymore. It shouldn't be, but it's not in our favour, put it that way. And as far as LMS go, we have a good working relationship, and we need to, because we need to increase our efficiencies. But as far as the rewards, and the financial rewards in particular, these guys have the carbon credit units, and that's what they're making the money out of, at $60 per tonne. We get a royalty back on that. After the carbon credit units went over $20 a tonne, we get 50% of that fraction above that. So now we're starting to get royalties, we're starting to get a return. We've been through the contract so many times with lawyers, it's watertight. It's impossible to get through. It doesn't have a review period. It's, yeah, like I said, I think it should be illegal to have contracts that long, and we don't anymore. But mind you, at the time, this was very early. This is way before we were talking about this stuff. So, you know, Launceston, I will say this, you know, working there for the last 7 years, it is quite progressive. There's been a lot of investment in their waste management resource recovery. There's been a lot of vision as well. And like I said, it's part of it. We need to tell the community about this. But this is an interesting story. And, you know, if they weren't to have their carbon credits, then they wouldn't be making anywhere near the amount of money. Just the energy generation wouldn't be worth it for them. So what happened recently in this wonderful relationship with them was we had landfills that were sitting there that didn't have the infrastructure in there yet. So I'm onto them saying, come on, hurry up. We need this. I'm onto them for 2 years, mind you, while the methane is going off into the atmosphere. Now, found out why they were dragging their heels is because their method of carbon credit acquisition was under review by the government. So there's a newness or an additionality part that comes into carbon credits. I'll explain it this way. We're diverting FOGO material right now, okay? If we went to make that a carbon credit project, we couldn't claim for anything that has already been done because that's an additionality. But we can, if we claim, go forward on anything that comes after. These are the complexities that are associated with carbon markets and carbon trading. Anyway, after 2 years, finally got them on site. Last month, they tapped all these wells that we've been asking them to get into these landfills, and we've increased our efficiencies by 50% already. So that means that when we look at these future carbon emissions, when we're looking at 80,000, if we're already doing well with our carbon capture, our methane capture, we're going to reduce them even further. When we're talking about what are we going to do about our carbon emissions, the first thing that we need to do is just bring them down. We need to invest money, resources and personnel to bring the footprint down. Not pay for carbon offsets because we're not investing in our future really, but we're going to have the same effect by investing in this. So I talked about the landfill price, $157 per tonne. That also includes the landfill levy. That also includes now $5 for an environmental fund. That $5, let's talk around $500,000 a year now goes to projects through the City of Launceston that can demonstrate carbon abatement. Yeah, but it's more broad than that as well. There's also environmental factors to consider. I showed you that fantastic graph before, the green and the red, and I mean this is just showing that again, but what's important here to look at is these are our carbon abatements over these years, 1920, 21 and 22, and we're seeing it get higher. So we want it to get higher. This is what we're abating, you know. So I just wanted to show some working examples. City of Launceston Aquatic Centre was gas-fired. Okay, so they used natural gas to heat the water and the systems in there. One of the major projects that we're involved in was getting it off gas, getting it onto our hydro energy, obviously renewable, but also installing solar in there as well. And just doing that project has pulled these. These Scope 1 emissions, 2,757 tonnes. Come over here, it's getting a little bit lower. Then we take the gas offline, 408. So it's had a significant impact. That's just one example. There are others in our business that we can do better at. 84% decrease, 64 across all total emissions. So a real working example, and it's working out well. David and I were speaking just before we started about the Sustainability Action Plan. So we had the Sustainability Strategy, then we have the Sustainability Action Plan, which has these 6 key priority areas, of which what we're talking about today, here we go, is the material efficiency and recovery optimisation. A lot of words, but we're trying to get away from waste. We're trying to talk about materials, we're trying to talk about material flows. But I want to bring this in to highlight that it's not just about that. Our Sustainability Action Plan goes across our whole organisation, and it basically is a roadmap for how we can do better across all of our business, not just landfilling. The landfilling and the resource recovery is the lion's share, but there's more to do elsewhere as well. This also, we did a review against the sustainability goals as well, and these are the ones that popped out. So it's been a really tremendous piece of work and gives us a roadmap forward. And I really do commend the team that I work with for their efforts in this. We've got some very passionate and smart people working behind the scenes always in this. Talking about the future also, we said the landfill will go out to 2050, and I'm talking about some of those innovations. Well, this is an anaerobic digestion model where we put organic material in and we can create a fuel source for energy as well. This is something that we're not seeing a lot of, but it's certainly a possibility. Here, this is what we're talking about, burning energy, taking the calorific content and creating energy from waste. Now, like I said before, social licence is against this. There's a massive one in Western Sydney that could go ahead right now, but people are against it. Completely chemically engineered and everything else, but the social licence just isn't there. The norm of it just isn't there. And I talked about hydrogen before as well, so we'll certainly be embracing a lot of that as it comes along. Actually, while I'm looking at the trucks, City of Launceston just got its first electric truck, so a flatbed truck that we're trialling now. We already have smaller cars for fleet, and this is our first truck that we've got out there with our operations team to see how it performs. Anyone seen the War on Waste?
Yes.
Right. War on Waste is fantastic. It's been around for 6 years. It pretty much came in when I started working at the City of Launceston in resource recovery and waste management. And it was such a blessing to actually have conversations about this now. Like I said, with these bins, just put it in the bin, forget about it. It's out of sight, it's out of mind. No longer. Not when you've got cheeky people like Craig Newcastle getting around and getting everyone's grills about things and really testing them. And also what it's done for our community is that, now we have the awareness, the expectation is growing as well. So it's been really great. Look, from a council point of view, the first few times it's come on, our switchboards just light up. It's just like, what about this and what about that? And what are you doing about this and what are you doing about that? Now they're gracious enough to actually engage with us before they release their episodes, which is good. They tell us, these are the themes, this is what you want to be aware of, and here are some of the answers. So it's been fantastic and really shone the light on what we're all dealing with. Part of what came out in War on Waste, and this is a challenge, this is a real challenge. I'm talking about PFAS. Now, PFAS up here, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. This is a man-made substance chemical which has been used in the past in fire retardants, it's used in non-slip, it's in this carpet. Guess what? It's in our blood. It's everywhere. But the issue is how much do you have in your systems, right? What was become painfully aware last year was that our compost had traces of it, our final product. Yeah. So what they found out was that it was coming in through compostable packaging. Now, compostable packaging is supposed to be our silver bullet for single-use plastics, right? So it's really thrown its spanner in the works. As far as, we can collect the FOGO, we can actually turn it into compost, but right now the City of Launceston has to stockpile it. And why it breaks my heart a little bit was because in the same week that I finally had a supply agreement for the compost material to go out, I also got this news and we couldn't put it out there because the suppliers wanted to use where we were going to with it. They wanted to use it on poppy production, but also they wanted to use it on pasture enhancements. So having the nature of this chemical is that it bioaccumulates, it doesn't disappear. It's in Teflon, it's in these type of things. It's really bad. But what's happening is there's movement now to remove it from things, okay? Particularly the compostable packaging. So by, I would say probably mid next year, we won't have compostable packaging with PFAS in it. And it's not all compostable packaging, it's not the liners, it's not the clear glasses that you see, but it's the kind of spongy packaging that, like a clamshell type thing. So we've just said, no, we won't accept it, but we also won't take it out. It's a bit of a step backwards with events because we've been working with events for 5 years to be able to get rid of all these single-use plastics and go to compostable and come to our facility. And then we had to turn around just before the event season last year and say, we can't compost it. We have to take it to landfill for now. Our limits or our concentrations were below current guidelines. At the moment, there's a National Environment Management Plan for PFAS, which is out for comment, which is coming back. And this is where we'll get our guidance from the federal and state government as to what we can do with it now. I'll give you an example about this chemical. I'm a mad trout fisherman. And when I was introducing my son into trout fishing, getting him on the worms, go down to the North-Esk River. Went down to Coral Inn and down near St Leonard's there, caught some fish, just little ones. My son was stoked. He just wanted to take them home and eat them. And then on our way back out, there's a sign there saying fish contaminated with PFAS. So the levels in that fish mussel were above the guidelines that we can have to eat. Now, where it's come from in the scheme of things, it's come from the fire retardants used up near the airport, which have made their way down the tops of those catchments into near Coral Inn and anything below on the North-Esk. Anything above that, no, it's not there. But these, and this is a study done by the state government. It's just something that we all need to be aware of, cognizant of, about our choices around some of this. It's confounding everyone, really. I just wanted to bring it up, though. So, next part of what we want to talk about is the circular economy. So everyone's talking about the circular economy, and essentially that's just getting away from this linear, we take the resources, we make it into something, we use it, then we throw it out. Now the drive is to be able to keep those resources circulating back, material flow, and remanufacturing. And that's where we're going. I mean, the world's going this way, and this is what we need to do to be able to keep these valuable resources going. Part of this, though, the equation really comes into the design of things, doesn't it? Like, it needs to be in a design. You can't design out waste. You can design out waste, but it needs to be done at the start. And this is where we find this extended producer responsibility, EPR, coming into this equation now. So this is saying, hey, I produce batteries. Well, you know what? You're not going to be able to produce those batteries unless you can show me a circular approach to that, and then that's always going to go straight back into remanufacturing. There will be some residual leak component that comes out of that, but it's a concept. It's something that we have to go towards, and it's something that's being invested in heavily. Early, when I started the presentation today, I talked about some of these opportunities and some of the challenges. I said that it's unprecedented as far as the policy, the legislation and the investment, and it really is. We've had the Australian Tasmanian Draft Waste Action Plan. It talks about those organic targets that I mentioned before, 50% by 2030, but the big target is to recover 80% of our material that is currently going to landfill. We want to get to 80%. The only way to do that is with investment. What has driven all this sudden, I wouldn't say sudden, but what has driven all this interest from the state government and our federal governments is that we had in 2018 the China Green Sword policy. China said to the rest of the world, we're not going to take your rubbish anymore. When I say rubbish, they would take our commodities. Let's talk about milk bottles, high density polyethylene. It's worth $700 a tonne. Now, people don't know that, but that's what it's worth. You probably need a lot. But they would send that over to China, but it would have a contaminated component with that. Now, they would take the good stuff and use it, but then they were left with this residual contamination that was stuffing up their environment. So while it was like, oh, everyone was struggling and everyone was like, what are we going to do? It was the best thing that could happen for Australia because it made us look inward. It wasn't just, oh, I'll just send it overseas, it'll be fine. You know, we'll pollute someone else's natural environments. We'll have health hazards for other people, not ours. So now what's happened is we're looking inward. We have to deal with it ourselves. And this is where the circular economy comes into it. This is where the extended producer responsibility comes into it. Equally, this is where export bans came in. So for tyres, for glass, for paper, and what else is there? Plastics. So if we're going to stop exporting it, we have to invest, and that's what the Australian government's doing. $250 million recycling modernisation fund. So Red Cycle, we're all aware of Red Cycle supermarkets, the soft plastics that we're all loving and feeling good about because we could drop it off and we knew something was happening. Well, unfortunately, they were pretty much set up to fail because China stopped taking it. Australia started taking it under this program and they just could not deal with the volumes, nowhere near. But this recycling modernisation fund, we'll see this back in supermarkets, I'd say, within the next 2 years. What this is doing, and we are playing catch up big time, we're going to have an industry that can look after itself in this sector, embracing these circular economy ideals, and also through the investment that we're going to see as well. As far as what we've seen in Tasmania, we now have a legislated landfill levy. So it went through our parliament. Before that, we were using like a voluntary one. Now it's $20 per tonne. Now that, on a yearly basis, is around $10 million, which is hypothecated straight back to the Tasmanian waste and resource recovery sector. Can't be used for anything else. Not roads, not bridges, not anything else. It has to come back for that. So we're seeing, while it's been a little bit hard to keep up, it's really a benefit for us across Tasmania. Tassie is catching up with Australia in regards to landfill levies. Ours is $20 now. Next year it's $40 a tonne. 2 years after that, $60 a tonne. If you look at Sydney, they're paying $180 a tonne just on their landfill levy component. So the landfill levy really is an economic instrument that says to people, there's better things to do with your waste than send it to landfill. So these are those instruments that we need to be able to drive these circular economy and resource recovery outcomes. What else is happening? Container refund scheme. Recycle rewards. We've been hearing about it for a while. It's coming from the state government. I believe it would probably be, if I had an infinite piece of string, I would say next year, probably June or July, we can expect that to happen. And essentially that's where you get your 10-cent refund for those drink beverage containers and be able to capture that. One thing that we have been using quite broadly here at Launceston is these product stewardship schemes. Now this is like an extended product producer responsibility where we all as consumers are paying. When we buy our tin of paint, there's so much of that money that goes to making sure that that tin and whatever's left over as the residual is looked after at the end of its life. We pay for it. And you can see it in the slip when you look on your receipt. It's the same now with batteries and tyres. When you buy your new tyres, you see, oh, right, okay. So this is where that money goes into a pool and then it's redistributed to make sure that they're done. And for us, it's for free. As a community, it's for free. A new one is batteries, which has just come on board as well. And by us engaging with these people and making sure that they come to us and we're part of their systems, it's free and we get complete records of the whole thing. So this is one way forward that we can, and we'll see more of this happening, I think, with that extended producer responsibility, even down to textiles. And then the next big thing that the City of Launceston can do is build construction demolition, or what I like to say widely is a diversion facility that I mentioned before. If we can invest in that, then we're going to probably be able to pull out at least 50% of what's going to landfill right now. Well, I hope that I've been able to add some knowledge to what we do at the City of Launceston in relation to waste management, resource recovery, the assets that we own, the services that we provide. And I guess I didn't really say it at the outset, but what we wanted to get today was leave the room with more knowledge than you had before. Equally, I wanted to come the other way. The council isn't great at getting your insight into these things because we're too hard at it, we're too working on it. But I want to understand from you, what are your priorities? What are your touch points? What's important to you? What are you passionate about? We will be doing some community engagement along these lines when we go to producing our next waste management type strategy.